Well, I think one of my hopes with the album was to kind of spark a curiosity in particularly Black young people, but really any age, to learn like in a self-guided way about our history, because I think that was one of my favorite things about listening to hip hop as a young person is like a name would be mentioned, whether it was a basketball player, whoever it was, I'd be like, who was that? And literally have to go look it up. And so I think a lot of times, at least in my schooling, I wasn't always given Black history. It was something that I always had to seek out. And so sometimes I think that can be a more fruitful process to do on your own anyway. And so I hope that in learning about our history, to me it's so empowering to know like what my ancestors have survived and that I'm not alone in like the feelings that I might have. And so I hope that that feeling is felt with the Black people listening, and especially young people. Well, I think there's probably many reasons for the powers that be wanting to suppress Black anger, particularly Black women's anger. Just seeing how, like thinking about Mamie Till, or like so many mothers of Black young people who have been killed, and the way that their anger is powerful. It can mobilize movements, and not just their anger, but their grief and their kind of sadness. And so I think all of that is a very potent and also contains information. Like you said, I love that quote, but I think it's kind of historically been shown that that is a spark and like a catalyst for a lot of change. And so I think it makes sense that it's constantly trying to be suppressed. And, you know, can't you just fit into this nice little mold and like speak softly and like not have crazy hair and just like calm it down, which is not right. It's terrible. So I like to think of my work as allowing space for multiplicities of Black womanhood or Blackness, and just having people feel affirmed in being their whole selves and not having to fit into something imposed by any on either side. Because I've also felt like sometimes Black people, you know, like growing up, me being in a lot of all white spaces and then going to all Black spaces, there are ways in which there were rules in each of those spaces, and those rules can be very limiting. And so for me, a lot of my work has been trying to make space for myself to feel whole, and regardless of who I'm surrounded by. My mom always had this book in our house growing up. It was like a book of Black photography, and it's called Songs of My People, an African American Self-Portrait. And I just had like maybe like Gordon Parks and like other photographer like work in it. And I just love the idea of like a bunch of pictures of different Black people and calling that a self-portrait. And so to me, I thought of the songs as like autobiographical self-portraits of myself through the lenses of each of these different artists and thinkers. And so process-wise, it was kind of like picking a point of entry. So for example, with the Nikki Giovanni song, it's her poem Ego Trippin'. For Frida Kahlo, it was the Blue House, the house with the bridge that she lived in. So picking a point of entry and then kind of being like, how do I relate to that? Or like, how would I rewrite that poem? Or who would I, you know, what do I feel about my relationships and how I want to like be in living situations with someone? Like, what do I need in that situation? So kind of just in the practice of like how I teach poetry with students that I work with, is always rooting it in the self, or at least having like some reference point for how can you make this, how can you enter this prompt or this idea in a way that's authentic. You will never know everything. You will never know.